Hello and welcome to Applicata Biblia. My name is Mark. So thankful you could stop by as we get a little bit into God's Word. We are continuing in the series, A Walk Through the Bible. We are in lessons 56 and 57. And usually when there's two lessons like that, it's because one of the lessons is a test or something that I would used to give my students. Now we're just doing this as this is kind of a pickup of a couple of books that I didn't cover in my original. When I made the book, I noticed that I didn't cover these two subjects, and I wanted to make sure I included them. We're going to look at two characters, Esther and Job. Now, it's interesting, and God is never mentioned in the book of Esther, and the story deals with his providence, like so many other things, like I've talked about already, in the last one. These people go and they're subjects to these people who worship other gods, but they find favor. Guys like Moses and Joseph and Daniel and now Esther, right? And it's interesting. Believers recognize his signature in this story of deliverance and irony. Now, and I'm going to try and cover this really quick, this story. But I would read the story. It's not really long, but it is so full of twists and irony, and just it's an amazing story, and faith as well. And I do think that it's interesting. The name God is never mentioned once, and in my own thinking is that this was while Esther was when Judah was in captivity, right? So here you've got this King Ahasuerus, who worships another god. You're not going to be writing a prolific writing about Jehovah God necessarily, not like Daniel necessarily. You might insult the king, and you'll see that this king is very immature. And a lot of these kings are really immature, and so you're not necessarily going to talk about Jehovah God, but there's a lot of references about him in here. So I ask my students, be ready to tell the story of Esther. And in this one little section that we're going to look at, I ask the question, is Mordecai speaking of God, and how can we tell? And how could these verses apply to my life? So let me just give you a rundown of the story. So Esther is this Jewish girl living in Persia. And there's this King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, if you will. And the king has this banquet, and they're all getting drunk and stuff, and he's having a good old time. And he sends for his queen Vashti. He says, "Tell Queen Vashti to come out here and basically parade herself because she's so beautiful." Well, Vashti sends him a little message and says, "No, I'm not going to do it. I don't think so." And and what happens? Well, the king loses face right on the spot. His wife telling him, no, that isn't going to bode well for her. So his counselors get around him and they go, "Hey, man, you can't let this stand, dude. You can't let your wife, insult you like that in public. Everybody else's wife is going to do the same thing." So he says, "Okay, I'm going to make a decree." So he makes a decree that says every woman better, respect her husband or something. It's pretty weak, pretty dumb, I guess. But he makes that decree, and then he says, "Oh, and by the way, let's," they all agree, "let's get a new queen," because that one's out. And so what happens? Well, they're going to look for a new queen, and of course, Esther is a young girl. Beautiful young girl, and she ends up in the court in the harem, if you will, of women who are possible replacements for Vashti. And she finds favor in the sight of the people taking care of them. Again, God's providence working for his people. That is the theme we see over and again throughout the scriptures. God looking at his people and just everyday people doing extraordinary things because they are God's representatives. Now, one of the things that there's this other guy, his name is Mordecai. Now, Mordecai is her uncle, and he tells her, look, you go in there and you're going to be part of this, but don't tell them you're a Jew. Don't tell them. So they choose this new queen. They choose, she obviously is very beautiful, and the king loves her, right? He sees her, and he loves her more than the rest of them. And so she is going to be installed now as this queen, right? But it isn't like the Queen of England, okay? These queens are just like one among many wives that these kings would have. They would have a whole harem of women that they would have at their disposal. She's given grace by God, and again, she doesn't really tell the king, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew, by the way. She doesn't do that, and that was at the council of Mordecai telling her. Now Mordecai happens to hear about a plot against the king, and he tells Esther, and she tells the king, and she says, Mordecai says that these guys are plotting against you, and he finds out it's true, and he has them executed, and that's kind of put aside. And then you meet this other guy. His name is Haman, and he hates Mordecai, and he hates the Jewish people. And so he plots against Mordecai and the Jewish people. And he goes to the king and he says, hey, king, look, there's a people who you shouldn't like. And he talks the king into getting these Jews, all the Jews, destroyed, basically. And then as the story goes along, he is also getting ready to kill Mordecai. So this Haman guy, gets this plot against the Jews, and he's getting ready to hang Mordecai. And he builds these big gallows. Well, in this verse right here, this is the verse we're going to talk about. Mordecai goes to Esther and tells her, you need to go to the king and you need to petition for us. And she says, well, what if he doesn't raise his scepter? In other words, if he doesn't raise his scepter when he sees me, I get killed. I don't know that I want to, she doesn't say, I don't think I want to do this. She's just saying, I might get killed. And then he tells her what he says in verse 4, and she does go. In chapter 4, she does go, and he says, oh, yeah, no, she says, our people are in big trouble because of this thing. And he finds out about it, and then it happens that Haman comes in, and you need to read the story, but Haman comes in, and Haman is recognized as trying to assault the queen. And you need to read the story to figure out how that all works. It's amazing how God makes it work. But Haman ends up being accused by the king as assaulting his wife, Esther, who he loves, right? Haman ends up getting hanged on his own gallows. Wow, I know it's not funny, but it's like the irony is just astronomically out of this world. The Jews are given the right to defend themselves. So obviously Haman was playing on the hatred for the Jews, but it didn't work out for them. Okay, so let's read this. Mordecai said to take back to Esther, so they're sending messages. Mordecai said to take back to Esther, he's sending the message to her, do not imagine within yourself to deliver yourself in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if you are completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance shall rise up to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall perish. And who knows if you have attained to the kingdom for such a time as this? So the question is Mordecai speaking of God? Of course he is. He's speaking about the providence of God. He's saying, what makes you think this isn't from God? And you are in this position to save his people. And how can we tell? Well, who else is going to do it? The Jews believe in Jehovah God. And how can these verses apply to my life? Well, of course, it's, we need to, and without going off too far off the deep end, we have to recognize that God will work in our lives. And I don't know how he does it. There's a lot of things I look at my life and I go, those were too many coincidences happened for me, and that drew me to God. Was that, God's angels working on me? I don't know. All I know is that I was drawn to him. And God works in different ways, and we have to be ready to recognize our opportunities to be drawn nearer to God. And whatever that might mean just being good, being nice to people, teaching others about him, and that sort of thing. Okay, let's get into Job. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Job, and Job is likely living toward the time of Abraham, but it's kind of hard to know. The story of Job centers around his ability to exercise patience and restraint, even though he faced great adversity and personal loss. Now, the whole story of Job is kind of a weird thing because we see into the spiritual realm, right? He's righteous before God. And let's just go ahead and read this. Because my question is, describe Job and list Job's possessions. There was a man in the land of Uz. His name was Job, and this man was perfect and upright, fearing God, turning away from evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Now, this is what he has. He has children. He has a wife, obviously. His possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 5,000 oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very great household, so that this man was greater than all the sons of the east. And his sons feasted in the house, each one with his day, and they sent and called their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it happened, when the day of feasting had gone around, Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to all their number. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This Job always did. So he's got a lot of stuff, right? He's got a ton of stuff. He's like the most prominent, wealthiest person in the East. And he's got 10 children, 7 sons, and they each get to have a day where they have a banquet at their house. They're living large here, Okay, 6-12. Is there anything weird about this story? Yes, there is, and you'll see what it is. And a day came when the sons of God came to present themselves before Jehovah, and Satan also came among them. Okay, that's weird. And Jehovah said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered Jehovah and said, "From coming to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it." And Jehovah said to Satan, "Have you set your heart on my servant Job? Because there is none like him on the earth, a perfect and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." And Satan answered Jehovah and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge for him and his house and for all that is his around you? And you have blessed the work of his hands and his livestock and have increased in the land? But put out your hand now and touch all that is his, and see if he will not then curse you to your face. And Jehovah said to Satan, behold, all that is his is in your hand. That is just weird to me. And Satan went out from the face of Jehovah. Okay, so that just is a strange encounter. I don't know what to comment about that. It's like, why, God, why are you talking to Satan? Get that guy out of there. But that's just part of the story. Okay, so verses 13 through 22, what do you think of Job's answer in verse 21? And how would you react to this sort of thing? So here's what happens. And a day came when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their brother's house, the firstborn, and a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell on them and took them away, and they killed the young men with the mouth of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So he lost all of these animals and servants. While this one was still speaking, the other also came and said, the fire of God has fallen from the heavens and has burned up the sheep and the young man who's taking care of them. And it has consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while this one was still speaking, this other one came and said, the Chaldeans came out of 3 bands and swooped down on the camels, and they have taken them away, and they have killed the young man with the mouth of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While this one was still speaking, this other came and said, your sons and your daughters. Now we're getting down to something terrible, even worse. His own sons and daughters. And drinking in the house of their brother, the firstborn, and behold, a great wind came from the wilderness and touched the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young men, and they died. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And Job rose up and tore his robe and shaved his head, and he fell down on the ground and worshipped. What? Okay. And I said, he said, I came naked out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. Jehovah gave, and Jehovah has taken away. Blessed be the name of Jehovah. In all this, Job did not sin nor charge wrong to God. And there are many more chapters after that where he continues to do that. And that's what this book is all about. Now, in chapter 2, Satan again meets God and talks to him, and he is allowed to strike Job's health. And what happens next is a series of discussions and arguments. We see Job's wife saying, just curse God and die. You're so miserable. All these terrible things have happened. But Job doesn't do that. He continues to bless God. Job's friends come and they argue with him. They're saying, what have you done? You've sinned. You've done something. You know, they try to rationalize everything. And they're kind of in the same boat as his wife. Why don't you just die and get it over with? These people just want Job to curse God and get it over with. And he doesn't. Eventually, God himself speaks to Job and basically says, yeah, you know, as humans, you wonder about these things and you want to attribute it to me. But where were you when I made all these things? He reveals that we want to blame God with so much all the time. That happens all the time when we have atheists come out and they want to blame God for children with diseases or hurricanes or, you know, earthquakes. They just want to blame God for it. It's like, what are you even talking about? And this whole time, Job is discussing these things and he's arguing with people and going back and forth. He never blames God. His faith is steadfast in God. And God ends up restoring him to his health and his possessions as well. And he beats the devil. But more than that, it's revealed that a man can understand God, that he isn't evil, and that things happen to us in this life. And this is something that we don't hear a lot about. In some Christian doctrines, they say, oh, if you believe in God, you're going to get rich. God wants you to have richness. You're a little God, which is a lie. I don't know why anybody would say that. But there are religions that call you little gods. We're little gods because we understand sin. And it's like, no, what are you talking about? Please don't be stupid. And that is, I don't like using that word, but that's just the fact. And there's people following these idiots that want to preach these things. We are always bowing down before God for his mercy. We're not gods. We're just lowly humans ready to serve. And that's one of the things that Job exemplified. And Jesus comes forward. When he comes, again, exemplifies it as well. When Jesus is ready to die the next day, what does he do? He takes a towel and washes his apostles' feet, the disciples' feet, showing what kind of service the Christian is cut out to do. Okay, that's it. That's it for the Old Testament in this series. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's, again, we just touched briefly on everything. No in-depth anything. Well, some of it is in-depth. And when we start talking about Jesus, you can't, that's just amazing to see all these things, how God works, everything. Okay, so in the next one, we're going to talk about what it all means, how going through the Old Testament, we'll look at a timeline, and what it means. There's a term called a time when God is silent, quote unquote. Is God silent? Maybe, maybe not. We'll talk about it before we get into the final book of the 4-book series. Thank you so much for stopping by. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you later.